Tell me a little bit about that day.
We couldn't figure out why we were there. Do they have gold here? What do they have? You know, we couldn't figure out what we were there. And it's still people don't agree what the war was about. We didn't know the terrain. They always sent us to new terrain, so we didn't know the terrain. I didn't know the terrain. Okay, that's also very bad for us if you're on that side. We ran into the enemy, and we got in a firefight, and it was pretty intense there for a while. And then someone gave me an M79 grenade launcher, and I shot it down at the enemy, and then some other grenades exploded and things going down. But when I shot that grenade launcher, something hit me too, the grenade. I don't know if it was that grenade or another grenade. Boom! Oh, that hurt. Can you imagine somebody putting an ice pick in your eye? Like, oh shit. So I went down. And then I couldn't feel my body anymore. I was just thinking, and I was still religious at the time. I was a Catholic, and I began to pray to God. I said, God, if you let me live, I promise I'll pick cotton free the rest of my life. And I saw myself picking cotton. I was making labor negotiations with God. And I started coming to. And I started thinking about my mother. And then the pain, that's when I started feeling my body again. And the pain was really excruciating. Oh man, it hurt. As soon as I got back home, after a few months, after I recovered from my malaria and my wounds and everything, the Border Patrol stops me out in the cotton fields. I said, wait a minute. You know? And they had guns. Too bad I didn't have a gun.
Hi, this is Juan Espinosa again, and this is Barrios Expressions, and we have some young ladies with us today from Union City, Fremont, Hayward area. Can you tell me a little bit about what is Barrios Unidos?
Okay, it's a club where we would like to unite all the Chicanos together.
Okay, that sounds like a really good idea, especially with what's going on this weekend as far as a lot of tensions. This is what the system wants us to do, is to fight each other so we don't get ahead.
The term Chicano, when that word came out, man, it just like it went into your soul. You know, this is who I am. You know, I am different. We were different. I don't care what we did, we were different. If we dressed, we did it differently. If we had bikes, our bikes were different. Our cars, we did it different. You know, that's just who we were because we were different.
To me, Holmes, it's like if you don't know that you're Chicano, then you're not. You dig what I'm saying? It's like, hey, if you don't, if you're asking yourself that question, maybe try softball or whatever. I don't know.
It's art, it's philosophy, it's religion. They are not identifying as Hispanic, right? Not identifying as Latino. They're identifying as Chicano, as a political statement to say, no, we're not with that European vibe, right? We're gonna go back to our indigenous, where we come from here on this continent.
I just want to say something on behalf of the people that do wear them type of clothes. Don't make no difference what you wear in this country. You're just judging a person right then and there. There's people behind these clothes that have a good heart. One bad apple can't spoil the whole bunch.
I hope it may be said 100 years from now that by working together, we help to make our country more just. I believe that at least it will be said that we tried.
You know, at that time, being Mexican in this country, it was heavily looked down upon. And so what begins to happen is you have this isolated culture living in this country and feeling very like abandoned and very like shut out.
It was just neighborhood kids. And they were so young and out there pretty much on their own. There wasn't that much work. Their parents worked 2, 3 jobs, you know what I'm saying? And they weren't able to really watch those kids. So there was a lot of kids in the street. And it's funny because I don't think it's a Mexican style thing. It was the Chicanos creating a third culture.
So how did you become involved in this organization?
I joined the American Indian movement on my return from Vietnam because I realized Politically, I became aware we're native people, we're indigenous to the land.
The Chicanos are very different than the Italians or the Germans or any of those other Europeans in that as a group, we were here already in this territory.
Mexicans are mostly indigenous people. They're not mostly European. You know, now it depends on what part. If you're closer to the northern part, you're more European, because even some Germans and others, Irish and others have moved in there, you know. But Mexico is more indigenous in its genome makeup than it is anything else.
Anytime we're trying to sort of understand Mexican-American history and culture, it's very complicated. The U.S.-Mexico War was the first war that the United States invaded another country. President Polk, who was the president at that time, one of his main goals was to get the land, right, that they wanted for westward expansion. He kept very detailed diaries every day of what he did, and in his journals and in his diary is the plan for initiating war with Mexico since they refused to negotiate and sell that land to them. When Polk sent in the military to that contested terrain, he knew full well that the Mexican army would see that as an attack, would cross over the Rio Grande and initiate, right, a battle with the military.
Thousands of people were lynched and shot and murdered and put in prison.
The U.S. was described as a go-ahead nation, sort of symbolized by like the American Railroad. It was all about moving forward, progress, right, sort of civilization. They didn't see Mexicans as having that capability to sort of build cities and towns right in the West. Mexicans learn about this war because they were occupied. They call it the Second Conquest. That's very telling, right? We don't learn about this war because it mostly happened in another territory. And so when that border is drawn, it divides, right, nations, it divides people. And overnight, people, where this was their territory, now they become foreigners in their native land.
The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo promised that former residents of Mexico who are now living in the American West would be afforded all and full and complete rights as American citizens. Well, that wasn't always honored.
It promised respect for Mexicans, that their culture, their language, their religion, if they stayed in the United States.
Hey, somebody's shooting. No. Why, there too. I heard them. Sound like it's over to the dam. Let's get going.
Today, you know, in the 21st century, we think about the American cowboys, the quintessential American. But if you go back to the 19th century and you read newspapers of the period, they hated cowboys because for them, a cowboy was a thief on horseback.
The newspapers and the media also are very important in portraying the Mexicans and the Chicanos as bandits and outlaws. So we have that to this day, too, with the media.
better get out of here.
No, wait.
Things really began to change because of the revolution in Mexico, and there were a lot of refugees who fled the violence. In fact, there have been some studies about how violent the Mexican Revolution was, and it's considered to be among the most violent of revolutions that occur in world history. And so there were a lot of people, including my grandparents, who fled the violence, and they came to the United States, never intending to stay, but they just wanted to wait out the violence.
My grandparents, both of them, fought in there. And they were actually enemies. And then my mom and dad got together, kind of brought together this two fighting factions. There's 1 million people killed and 1 million refugees when Mexico only had 15 million people. That's about the size of Guatemala right now. So it was very impactful. There's a lot of suffering, a lot of death.
It wasn't as heavily populated or urban, until maybe post the Mexican Revolution.
Then it started to go bigger, 30s and 40s, more coming over. But those were the first barrios.
Once the border patrol gets established, it becomes a little bit more policed, right? So it becomes more difficult. So Mexicans have to make a choice. If I cross over and work here, I might not be able to come back, right? So you actually see the development of Mexican-American communities in places like San Antonio and Tucson, in Los Angeles.
So today in the 21st century, we're largely color conscious when we think about race, right? And so when we invoke the terms of race, we think it has everything to do with skin color, right? It has a lot to do with prejudices that already exist about your place of origin, about your accent, about just all these ideas about what it meant to be Irish or to be meant to be Jewish or Italian, or, I mean, the list goes on and on. They're all thrown together in these segregated neighborhoods. That's what makes things really interesting when you start studying the social dynamics, is you have white working class kids living right next to Mexican Americans and African Americans as well, because that kind of ghettoization is where all the racialized individuals went. And it was more than just color.
We have to understand and accept that it's not like today, whereas today if we see Irish people, we see Italian people, we think of them all as white. This was not the case back in the day. Italians and Irish, Jews, Russians, they also had their little share of discrimination because they were non-Anglo.
They were forced to live in these areas. They had nothing to do. They couldn't go to the parks. They couldn't go to the movies. They weren't allowed to. Mexicans weren't allowed to go to those places, so they had nothing to do but hang out on the corner.
Gangs is a later phenomenon, but what happened is these young people would gather, and sometimes they would play they would have clubs.
Whenever you get groups of people, they tend to form these little cliques. It could be a varsity football team that likes to go out and beat up another football team,
With my neighborhood, it was a football team. And then after that, there's another football team. So one football team starts fighting another, right? And that becomes a fight. And after that, it becomes where, hey, those guys are from here, we're from here, and they become a gang.
Our West Coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens.
Well, pachuco was something, with these Mexican Americans that like to be a little rebellious. They wore the Zoot Suit, which was frowned upon because of, war rationing. They wore more fabric than they needed.
El Paso is where it was formulated into an example of a label for Mexicans who dressed differently, who spoke differently.
Pachuco actually comes from El Paso, because the Mexicans were coming through El Paso more than any place. El Paso was the big opening. So the Zoot Suiters were an interesting combination of street, urban, Mexican slang and talk. It was de caló. They talked that different Spanish. The slang was very elaborate. They took a lot of the boogie woogie music thing, but they Mexicanized it, and I think that's an important part of it.
What pachucos came to represent was anti-American. In a time, in a wartime climate where anything that was perceived as outside of the parameters of what was considered to be American was looked down upon and incriminated.
I think with the Zoot Suit, you know, obviously when you sort of think about what did the Zoot Suit mean to sort of that Mexican-American generation, because, you know, wearing the Zoot, you know, represented pride, right, sort of respect.
They all came about through being up against a wall. Whatever oppression was going on, it's like, okay, I'm not gonna be like the norm. I'm gonna stand on my own and do my own thing.
For the women, I believe there was even more rebelliousness or more anti-traditional.
The people who originally came here from Mexico, you know, they were fighting for freedom, fighting for progress, and fighting for success on some level. And then, you know, generations go by and you have these younger generations of kids who are more modern thinking, and they're like, you know what, Charlie Holmes, like, I'm not gonna tone this down. Matter of fact, I'm gonna turn it way up.
There were plenty Mexican-American Chicanos that were represented in World War II as soldiers. My great uncle was one of them. He's in his 90s now. You know, and he still is very patriotic, and a lot of the youth were, but there was definitely some in the barrios that did not want to go and fight. It's like other wars, you know, that we can think of.
There was a lot of them that either joined or got drafted. Mexican population was pretty much decimated by the war. People were fighting. The ones that stayed were generally the women, like the other communities that worked in the industry to help the war effort. LA became the largest manufacturing center of the country during World War II because of the ships. The shipyards, it was close to the harbor, it had a lot of defense industries. Defense industry is big in California, and LA was the heart of it.
The interesting thing is that while the Chicanos were fighting the sailors here in Los Angeles, their brothers were fighting a war for democracy somewhere else, supposedly. So, you know, there's a big contradiction there.
It's the biggest contradiction of World War II. While we are fighting oppression abroad, we are oppressing people domestically.
During World War II, right, I think it's, again, it kind of reveals like we're all fighting, we're all the good guys, we're spreading democracy in Europe, but the reality is that we're still treated as less than here in the United States.
On the night that Jose Diaz was killed, there was a birthday celebration happening at a ranch in rural Los Angeles County. And they had a reservoir. They had a couple reservoirs, but the largest one, local kids would use as a swimming pool because, again, because of segregation, you couldn't go down to the local swimming pool and swim.
There was a party that night, a birthday party. Some uninvited guests came.
There was a group of Russian immigrant kids from Downey that crashed the party, the birthday party. They want beer, they want to join the party. They get thrown out.
They're driving down the road to get out of Williams Ranch, and they happen to pass by Sleepy Lagoon, where there's a couple couples from 38th Street that are there.
Words are exchanged, and a fight breaks out between the Downey boys and the young men and women who are parked around the reservoir.
The 38th Streeters go back to their neighborhood, come back in a few carloads, and no one's at the Sleepy Lagoon anymore. It's quiet.
Downey boys are now long gone, but they're looking for them. And somebody says, well, maybe they're still at the party up the road. And so that's when 38th Street kids then go up to the party. And a fight broke out. And then the 38th Street kids left immediately. Someone said, the cops are coming, and they all hopped in their car and they took off. So the party goers at the ranch hands, they're picking up after the fight. They're trying to see who's hurt. This is when they find the body of Jose Diaz. So they had dragnets all throughout LA County, and they just ran kids through, fingerprinted them, took their pictures, and things like that. And eventually, they land on the 38th Street kids who happen to be at the place near the time that Jose Diaz was killed.
The Zoot Suit riots happened about a year later around different parts of LA, and it spread to different parts of the country, in fact.
Pachucos were rounded up, beaten down, had their clothes cut off of them, their hair cut, publicly humiliated, and then arrested.
There's no weapon produced ever. There's no eyewitness produced ever. There was no confession that was ever produced.
And a lot of it had to do with the media saying that these Mexican gangs were terrorizing neighborhoods. They were robbers, they were rapists, they were murderers.
Criminals, they're thieves, they're immoral.
And again, I remind you that studies have looked at arrest rates and all these kinds of things, and there is no demonstrable evidence that juvenile delinquency was actually a problem, but people were worried about it.
Here you had kids, young people, that were freely engaging and enjoying their First Amendment right to freedom of expression. And they were beaten for it because they were perceived as an anti-American threat.
The Zoot Suiters might have had a more communal understanding of the representation of their neighborhood. But when that evolved from Pachuco to Cholo, that all changed. And that became, that's when the gang culture really spawned, and it took on a whole new meaning. So if you put your neighborhood on you, you were gonna either live, die, or kill for that tattoo.
It was Pachuco, but then it became eventually Cholo. It became a whole different way of doing things that nobody had done before.
After World War II, technology had changed. So black folks, they went from doing jazz and swing to doing rock and roll, to doing doo-wop.
The reason why black people and Mexicans interacted and started taking from each other was because they're living close.
A lot of people argue about the origins of lowriding. What we can agree upon is that lowriding begins in the Mexican-American experience in the southwestern part of the United States.
Now remember, during World War II, Detroit is not making new cars, right? Because Detroit has shifted to wartime production. So after the war, right, returning veterans, they get a little bit of money to buy cars, right? Also, there's a turnover in secondhand cars because people after the war want new cars. So I think what's really interesting about lowriding is that you're sort of taking sort of these secondhand cars and turning it into something beautiful.
Because older cars, nobody wanted them. Everybody wanted the new cars. So old cars, you could get an old car for like $300. And we would just modify them a little, put rims, lower them down. And
the hydraulics came because we used to lower these cars because it was just cool. And the law was you couldn't have a lowered car. So they would have it so that they would lift them up so they can be legal and then drop them down so they can be party. You know what I'm saying?
There was a surplus of aircraft parts and the hydraulic lifts. So it just took the ingenuity and mechanical know-how to install those on a car in order to be able to raise up to a legal ride height.
I think the only, culture that is identified by our cars, where you see a car that's a 64 Impala with Virgen de Guadalupe airbrushed on it, or the pinstriping on the sides, and you go, that's Chicano culture on wheels.
When you customize a car, the whole goal is for you to assert your individuality. You can have 10 64 Impalas lined up, and they're all gonna be different.
What do you think of today?
What do I think of today?
Yeah.
It's pretty feed me right now.
And who's this right here?
It's Juanita.
Juanita, what do you think is happening today?
It's pretty live.
Yeah? Well, what are you doing out here? Checking out the cars?
Checking out the guys.
Checking out the guys. All right, okay.
You're tuned to Community Access Television Channel 3, serving San Leandro, San Lorenzo, and Hayward.
Hello, thank you for tuning into Barrio Expressions, and tonight we have some information for you.
Men are cool with us. They accept us. There's a lot of men that they congratulate us. They're happy for us. They're proud of us. And then there's the men that are quiet. They kind of just look at us like, they give us the looks.
I think what we're thinking about, whether it be hot rods or lowriders, is how the car, particularly for men, right, becomes a way to express.
To me, the candy paint, the pinstriping, that's all just, it takes time and effort and detail, you mean?
Those cars, you can't drive that fast back then,
They're on 13-inch rims. The suspension's cut and it has hydraulics. Like they're swaying all over the place.
I think that we've always done things our way. So car customization is just one of the variables in the equation. Lowriding is an artistic and linguistic expression, and by default, it's political.
If you follow the lifestyle and you're one of us, you are one, man. We don't look at you as color, you know? And we never did see him as color. My homeboy, my black homeboy, or my white homeboy, that was my homeboy regardless, you know? I didn't see him as a color.
So we used to have 2 or 3 homeboys that were white, that were just homies. We never saw them as white. They talked pachuco too, cholo. They talked galo, you know, they talked our style.
I've seen a lot of car events, lowrider events, where there was a lot of black and brown, and everybody had nothing but love for each other.
Anytime you key in solely on race, you miss, you know, the big picture. You know, it's a very narrow view.
Johnny Marvin is now in the hands of the law. This is the first time he's been caught, but his delinquent tendencies began long before in the conflicts of an unhappy home and in the hangout of the gang which was his refuge.
When I worked in East LA, I wound up in the gang unit because I love working gangs. So then I went to Compton. I got to work my own neighborhood, Willowbrook, and I got known for being the guy who works gangs. I used to describe what I did as a police officer as being the referee at an incredibly violent hockey game. I came from Compton. I came from a very poor neighborhood. Some of my best friends became gang members. They became prison gang members. That could have been me. If circumstances were different, maybe I could have been one of them. In 1966, after I graduated from high school, I went into the military, and the military put me through a battery of tests. It was the military who decided that I should be a military policeman. I came out of Vietnam. I went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. I was by then a sergeant, and they had a program where you could get out of the military early if you enlisted in the LAPD or LA County Sheriff's Department. My mother and father were anti-pachuco. My father, he was in the military in the 40s, and all my uncles. So this idea that it was a rite of passage and all Latinos, you know, were involved in this, no. 90% of the Latinos in the communities I know, they joined the army, they got jobs, they went to school, things like that.
Some of the young people are doing bad things, but most of them are not. They're just grouping together. But eventually, if the police start messing with you and start detaining you, holding you for little things, eventually you start getting records, and pretty soon you become in the gang.
Chicano culture, it came from youth. We have to understand that those pachucos, they weren't like grown men and women, you know. They were kids, you know, so it came from kids.
If you were there at that time and you asked my uncles or my father, they're panderos. They're... my grandma called them marihuanos. You know, don't hang around with those pieces of trash. By the way, the Zoot Suit is a open sign of rebellion against the United States.
Did everyone walk around, you know, orderly, you know, this kind? No, they didn't. There's no evidence. As a matter of fact, the play Zoot Suit, which revolves around the 30th Street kids, they didn't speak Galo. They didn't speak Spanish. These were Americanized Mexican Americans.
This is the 7.62 machine gun system, known in the Army as the XM6 kit.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. I have asked for this television time tonight to report to you on our most difficult and urgent problem, the war in Vietnam.
When I was there at Travis Air Base, I was there in the bed watching on August 29th, 1970, those riots going on in L.A. Well, you know, being a soldier, but my political thinking had changed. I said, oh, I know how to deal with those sheriffs. I know how to deal with them. Yeah, just give me a gun. I changed. The war's at home. Now the war's here, and these people are attacking our people, so it's my duty to attack them. That was what I was thinking as a soldier.
One of my friends in the Army, he grew up with me, he went to Ralph J. Bunch Junior High School with me and all that. He's a lifer in the military, and then one day he came home on leave, and I went to go pick him up at the airport. And when he got in the car, I tell him, hey, Johnny, I got a 9mm on my side, I got a 45 under my seat, and there's a 380 on my right leg, and there's a 38 in the glove box. And he looks at me and goes, Richard, you're paranoid. I was, right? I was ready for that fight. If it was gonna come, I was gonna be ready.
Our communities were especially impacted. Poor white as well. Working class people were getting hit, really hit with Vietnam. Vietnam was the war that brought more conscience, I think, to those issues than any other war.
You know, to me, especially as a Vietnam veteran, it's difficult for someone to admit that they fought for nothing. We fought for nothing, and we lost a lot of people, and the Vietnamese lost a lot of people. 3 million people. Forget about them.
I don't recognize these streets. Streets I used to call my own. Feel the days are getting longer as the anger grows and grows. And I'm tired. I'm just so damn tired. You hear the people in the streets. We're all out.
The anti-war Chicano movement became a catalyst for a rallying point for other causes, such as the Black Civil Rights Movement, the anti-war movement, the hippies and all of that, you know, the counterculture movement.
What I disliked was the agitators who would come into the community and agitate the locals. And when the time came when confrontation would occur, guess where they were? They were somewhere else. And you know what? They usually weren't from our neighborhood, right? They were some rich kid in college, you know, a privileged guy who was coming down to the neighborhood to create a problem and then leave. Some of these guys were backed by Red China and Russia.
So we're building that conference, and we're also hoping to invite all of you to come on Sunday at 3 p.m. at the corner of Clifton and Sherman at the George I. Sanchez Center. And again, I remind you that most of us will have to think about what this means, because it is true. I feel very much that they do not know the difference. They don't see different thing when they look at Mexicano or Chicano. They see the same thing. And these two things are integrally tied together.
In the 60s and 70s, there was a very clear distinction between Mexican Americans and Chicanos. Chicanos were those who self-consciously embraced a politicized agenda and identity. And we made a very clear line between us Chicano and those Mexican Americans.
I would say Chicano was a term that was used a lot in my household. My pops, growing up in that era, I would say, being real young in the 60s.
To me, growing up, Chicano and Mexicano, I didn't even know there were two different words. We used them interchangeably. Okay, but then it became politicized.
Chicano as a term was already used in the streets. And I know even when I was growing up in Watts and eventually the East Side, the San Gabriel Valley, before the Chicano movement, we were calling each other Chicanos.
For me, Chicano growing up meant being two things at the same time and not enough of either one.
Born in America with Mexican parts, right? So we're trying to be American, but we have this big influence of Mexico and our heritage, our relatives, trying to combine the two.
I think now that we have social media is now you see how many homies really aren't Mexican. When I met my wife, she didn't know I was from Central America. I think she found out after we got married. or she found out maybe a few years after we actually were together. I consider myself Chicano, and there's nobody gonna tell me different. If I would have never came out and said, hey, I'm from Honduras, you would assume, yeah, Gil's Mexican. There's a lot of us out there, but it's not that I'm trying to be Mexican. It's not that I'm trying to be anything else. I'm a guy from North Hollywood that, consider myself Chicano because that's what I am.
What do you think about police who say that if you wear tattoos that you're a potential gang member?
False. False statement. Because a lot of people that have tattoos don't belong to no gang. I don't want to mention
I don't think you should be like you put in a different group because you got tattoos. There's a lot of people that have tattoos. My father has tattoos. He's 50 years old. Does that make him a gang member?
No, this one's no.
I think that was like one of the strongest ways that they could say, no, look at me, and I'm not gonna go and hide, and I am proud of, because I remember getting my last name on my back when I was a kid. That was the first tat I got. And I went to school the next day and I wore a slingshot. I wouldn't even wear a t-shirt because I wanted everybody to see that tat, Holmes. And, the homeboys are like, orale, Chooks, you got tatted, homie, that's firme. But I saw teachers and other people and they looked down their nose at that marking on my back that meant so much to me. And I just remember thinking, you know what? I don't care, man. Like this emblem, this badge of armor that I'm wearing right now, it's way, way, way more magnetic and powerful to me than their opinion of what they think I am.
I was brought up as a Catholic because of my grandmother, as a child. So it's always has a meaning to me. My religion is who I am, and culture, and I guess family. I mean, that's who you love. That's the closest thing to you.
Your ethnicity, your family, or your culture, and these are the things that will never change. And these are like the core of our representation when it comes to tattooing. If you look at any true vato from that lifestyle, look at the image they wear. They're all similar.
I think that going back to the 70s and certainly the presence of Good Time Charlie's tattoo shop on Whittier Boulevard, that Chicano-style black and gray tattooing moves to the shop where historically it was a prison experience.
The plaqueazos, the graffiti, Chicanos have a very distinct style of graffiti.
It wasn't just tagging. The Chicanos were creating these really large, elaborate pieces.
A lot of it came from the YAs. The YA system, that's where Freddie Negretti and all these people come in, is because they started in there, and I know the people that were in there with him, and they would do it for the guys wouldn't, start any fights or violence, would let them, okay, you guys could tattoo each other or whatever, you know, to stay out of trouble, you know. So they would start practicing it on each other, and those patterns start turning into collages and stuff, you know.
I'll never live this down. My peers are going to kill me. Okay, working in a prison is...
Okay, let's take a beat for 2 seconds.
Okay. Working in a prison is not always what people think or what the community thinks. We like to have the community come and tour the prison so they don't have the idea that we are the old stereotype James Cagney type prison guards. We're professionals.
Well, all the traditional gang dress from the 60s and 70s all came out of prison. So like you said, a shirt folded neatly over the arm, the white T-shirt, the khakis, the white tennis shoes, all that stuff was county issue or state issue. So guy walking down the street who deliberately was dressing in that way was telling everybody, hey, I just got out of the jail, you know, or I got out of the joint.
It was completely different, and there was a big awe. It was like, I don't even know how to describe it. And I just knew when I was in kindergarten, when I was in first grade, all I wanted to do was be a cholo, you know what I mean?
The cholo style became very khaki, iron, certain shoes that can allow you to run but also be cool.
The baggy pants, the Nike Cortez, dark lipstick, the Sharpie eyebrows.
Pants were perfectly creased, and you couldn't have a wrinkle on your shirt. You know, you couldn't have a hole in your jeans. You couldn't have a scuff on your shoes.
White tees eventually became the thing that Chicano made big. You know, the wool caps and then Pendletons, you know, and then keep them buttoned too, because it actually flared out a certain way if you have 2 buttons up here. They started stylizing everything just like the pachucos did.
They were still wearing their pants like they did with the Zoot Suits, except they were replaced more so by clothing that reflected their social conditions. So I would say 3 different things. 1 is the military, 2 is labor, and then 3 is the pinta.
I ran a teen center program in Willowbrook for troubled kids under the Catholic Youth Organization in the War on Poverty. So if you would have saw me then, you would say he's an activist, a liberal, a Chicano, right? That's what I was. But when you become a policeman, you get to see things from the other side.
I got committed in 91 for shooting at some cops, and you shoot at some. Obviously, I didn't like the cops for a certain point in my life, right? When you become a gang member, a lot of people believe that off the bat, they're just killers, and you know they're cold-blooded individuals, and that can be the farthest thing from the truth. It has a lot to do with prison. Prison has had a huge influence over us in a negative way. It's made us believe that that's where we want to go. I think we're the only culture that strives to go to prison. African Americans don't do it. Irish never did it. The Italians never did it. No other race has ever said, I want to go to the joint. Us, as kids, even now, I want to go to the joint because we glamorize the hell out of it.
Why do you think the cops are doing this?
Basically, I don't think they like too many Chicanos crowded around at one time. So they see that and then they get afraid. They're afraid that we're all congregating in one. See, we don't have adequate facilities down here for the youth around this neighborhood. I think it would be a good idea if they can get some money together to provide for them, to have some place to go so they would stay off the streets. Like a little clubhouse. There's plenty of vacant buildings around here which can be leased out, you know, on the government funds or what have you, and put the money to use, you know, rather than take it from us and not use it for nuclear weapons or whatever. You know, use it for the community, you know, use it for the kids so they can have some place to go, so they don't hang around like they always are, and then they won't be harassed. I mean, they don't have no right talking about the way you dress. You know, the police think that La Raza is a big gang. You know, we just come to have fun, meet new people, and everything like that. You know, we ain't a gang. We just people like to have fun.
Nicholas Rosenberg here, punching back. I'm a private criminal defense attorney in the Los Angeles and Southern California area. I'm considered to be a certified specialist in criminal law, and I tend to do a lot of cases with gang allegations and serious and violent felonies. There's a lot of racial profiling that happens around the gangs, and if you see somebody, you know, 5'8", 20-year-old, HMA, bald head, big white t-shirt, baggy pants, then someone's going to say, hey, I think that guy might be a gangster, so law enforcement can initiate contact with that person.
Well, you know, everybody profiles. We see a car, it's driving erratically, it's got a busted taillight, you know, and we pull the car over, but we didn't profile whether he was black or white or Hispanic. We profiled the car and the way it acted.
To just blame police officers for all our issues? No. At this point in time, we already know. You're gonna sell drugs? You're gonna go to jail, homie. You're gonna carry a gun? You're gonna go to jail, homie. You're gonna shoot and kill somebody? You're gonna go to jail, homie. You're gonna try to pull a gun on a cop? You're gonna get shot. It's like, these are basic gang banging 101 rules, homie. You're gonna do this stupid shit's gonna happen to you. But it seems like society is so woke. Streets ain't woke. You're gonna get shot and killed.
When they first started those gang injunctions, I said, no, that's not good. That's not a good thing. Everybody got mad at me and they said, oh, well, these injunctions are working. I said, if you tell a gang member that he can't associate with other gang members, who's he going to associate with? Rival gang members? If he can't hang out with his cousin, if he can't make a phone call, if he can't live in his own neighborhood.
A gang injunction is basically a civil public nuisance order, and it's designed to prevent them from associating together. It can prevent them from wearing clothes, for example, Dallas Cowboy jersey. It can impose a curfew on, quote, known gang members, and it really can be disruptive to the community because you might have a cousin or a family member who's also served the gang injunction, and now you can't associate with that person.
Once that gang injunction went into place, you can kind of tell it became more like a patrolled state environment. You mean a lot of homies started dwindling down. They were getting incarcerated for hanging out with each other. And I'm talking about cousins and brothers and siblings, family.
Another thing I didn't like that we were doing was called gang sweeps. You know, you go into a neighborhood and you find out everybody that has a warrant or a suspect in something, and then you arrest 200 gang members and you seize 500 guns. Those things are not effective. That's a Band-Aid. That's a for show for the 5 o'clock news. But that doesn't really affect a gang member. What affects the gang members is when you catch the guy who actually did the shooting. You bring him before the court and he gets sentenced and goes to jail. Then the neighborhood knows they're not just picking on us because we're Hispanic.
I think I went to prison at a time when even a lot of prisoners that, you know, that's their home at the end of the day. You know, they've been in there for a long time, some of the OGs. And I think I went to prison during a time when a lot of Chicanos inside prison were becoming political conscious, or at least it was being broadcasted to the public that we're no longer just going to sit back and accept what the state called rehabilitation, because there is no rehabilitation in there. If anybody's giving us rehabilitation, it's going to be ourselves.
When it came to getting released and I would go to court, I would tell the judge I didn't want to go home. I wanted to stay in there. And, and they were looking at me like, this guy wants to stay here? I go, I actually did, because they were like those were like my brothers there now. You know what I mean? I had a bond with these guys,
Typically, when somebody's incarcerated in a prison environment where everyone else is already convicted, if they're offered the opportunity for rehabilitation, then their likelihood of reoffending goes down.
What are they going to do when they're out of prison? How are you going to help them? How are you going to give them the knowledge and the skills and whatever they need to make it? I think most of these guys, and I've talked to a lot of them, thousands and thousands of guys in prison, want help. They just can't get it.
I'm sitting on the beach in Corona del Mar Beach, my favorite one, in between Laguna and Newport Beach. I have my little cooler with my Chardonnay. I have my New York Review of Books to read. And I saw these 3 or 4 white dudes that looked like teachers or coaches. And they come down to the beach from there's a little hill you have to walk down. They come down to the beach with about 40 or 50 kids in shorts. Most of them were Mexican. And I found out they were part of a juvenile group. These guys were kept in the house separate from the jail, and we're training them and teaching them. And I started crying. Because I said, that's all our kids need, man. Just get them. If they want to act bad, come on. We'll get you in an organization. We'll supervise you. We'll feed you. Act bad that way. Learn ways of acting that you're not going to kill yourself with drugs or alcohol or kill somebody else, some innocent person.
Sometimes I think as Chicanos, I think what destroyed a lot of us is sometimes when you have too much pride destroys and you start killing each other. Too much pride is bad.
Hip-hop, by the way, was always black and brown. It was the Puerto Ricans that helped create hip-hop, all 5 aspects of it, and then the Mexicans right away got into it.
We started getting wind of punk rock and hip-hop, and at that time, the skateboarding, breakdancing, that whole scene was real big.
I remember in the late 70s and early 80s when Mexicans were already doing breakdancing before anybody saw it. Nobody did breakdancing in LA except Mexicans. It wasn't even black people.
One of my earliest memories as a person, not even as a lowrider, but one of my earliest childhood memories was seeing the Gypsy Rose come across the screen on TV in the opening Chico and the Man credits.
Chico, don't be discouraged. The man.
When it came on, Chico and the Man, we're on TV. It was like that car was representing us, all of us. When I seen that thing, it was like you got goosebumps. Like, man, we're on TV, And I think that's what makes that car so famous, is because it was the first car to break that barrier.
At that point, I realized that lowriding was much bigger than what I knew it to be on the street or in the park.
Lowrider magazine was such an important sort of product that really
visualize lowrider culture around the world, right? And it played a very big role in sort of the marketing and dissemination of lowrider culture.
You know, they took something that was there and they innovated and they looked at it with a different perspective. And so Sonny Madrid had started Lowrider magazine. He's originally from San Juan, but I think it's also important to know that he was also an activist. So he was heavily involved with the Chicano movement.
When it started, you know, in 1977, it was a magazine by Sonny Madrid, Ryan Larry Gonzalez. It was a magazine for Chicanos by Chicanos, and it was for the Chicano community.
And that just created a big old explosion, because this is the first time you could open a book, a magazine, you could see our people as we are in our neighborhoods and communities, you know?
The onset of gangster rap in the 90s, you know, and that's where we really see like the global exposure to lowriding was through the channels of the early 90s gangster rap videos.
You see it in hip hop, right? I see it with lowriding Chicano culture, where like, because of globalization and because of the internet, people are learning about our culture through the screen.
I tell you, when I was in Japan, and you know, there's a big Cholo lowriding culture there. It's a subculture. I was very amazed how respectful the Japanese were, because part of me was saying, oh, they're appropriating our culture. You know, part of me is like, hey, they're using us. I didn't get that. They totally love the culture, and they give it props. They say, this is Chicano. A lot of people take the culture and don't say that. And so they said this, and they really emulated it so good. They followed it. And so I began to respect them for respecting us.
Yeah, like Japan does everything incredible. Like anything like artistically or technically, you know, they're like masters.
When they jump into a culture, they go 100% in.
Does one sole group have ownership over lowriding? That in and of itself is debatable, right? So, you know, it's like when I talk about lowriding in Japan and people that don't know any better go, lowriding in Japan, that's crazy. I'm like, is it? What about a little white kid in suburban America who's taking karate lessons, who's counting in Japanese? Is that crazy?
But one thing I noticed, they were all into the culture, beautiful, tattoos and everything, but they're not gangster. They're not killing each other. And I'm saying they kind of picked up the beauty of it and not picked up the ugliness.
So, any of you have any questions about body of warfare, about the conference that's going to be taking place this Saturday at Mission High School in San Francisco? Feel free to give us a call at 785-4917.
The thing that worries me, though, is the barrio warfare. You know, like, I'm a gringo, and it kind of worries me, because I'm in the south end of Hayward, and I know you're hep, but what about all the other dudes that's riding around, you know, looking for some happenings, you know, some action?
Okay, before anybody keeps calling, I want to make some points clear. There's a lot of youths, there's a lot of raza that are being murdered. We got to stop. We got to stop and realize that those persons, regardless of their color, regardless of their race, are human beings.
There still are a lot of us who live that lifestyle, and I've seen my share of war, and I'm over it. I've been over it, Holmes. Aggression, anger, and violence on any level. Hey, Holmes, I am a retired tough guy, for reals. You know what I mean? I did all that. But to me, the strongest gesture I can make in this point in my life is to totally move in a different direction, because it solves nothing and never did and never will.
Unless you want to change, you're never going to change. It all comes from you, man. You got to want to change, you know. Once you change yourself, things will change with you, man.
Hey, homie, I was wrong. I'm still on my hood, but now when I see the homies, instead of, trying to give them a strap, I try to give them some advice, work, get a highlight, do this. This is gangster, homie. People get upset at me sometimes. That's just being a man. That's maybe to you, but I'm trying to change the narrative. Being gangster now is going to work, taking care of your family, putting food on the plate, man, put a roof on top of the kid's head.
We have a beautiful culture. Spanish, Indian, it's a beautiful culture. But they didn't want us to be gangsters. That's not what they wanted, right? They built Los Angeles. Anybody can go down to the Placita and look under that big tree at the plaque of the founding families that founded Los Angeles. There they are. Their names are there. That's the kind of people we want to be, making life better. And they were mestizos. They were Spaniards, they were Indians, mulattoes, whatever they were, but they all worked together. And we founded Los Angeles, and it became a great city. We need that. We need that again.
Howard Zinn said you can't be neutral on a moving train. And I think that that's also true for low riding. It's one of those things that elicits a reaction one way or the other.
It's tough to kind of just be like, yeah, use it for commercials, use it to look cute, because, it means a lot more to certain people. And, but then me, I just feel like, you know what, though? At the end of the day, are we there still? Let's make the best of it.
Well, culture changes. Culture changes, that's, I wouldn't say it's not necessarily good or bad, but we just have to understand why and how it's changing.
I think that I've substituted that hatred and the diversity and the segregation for a true love for our people. And I just see it for what it is, the cultural and how strong and how amazing, our thing really is. And so to see it tainted or harmed by anything, to me, it don't sit right with me.
This place has given me the opportunity to raise my family, to be a successful person, from being a gangbanger, from doing 6 years in YA, all that stuff, and I'm still here, and I'm winning. Why? Because America gives me that opportunity. America's not gonna just hand it to you. You gotta work for it.
We all swim in this economic, political, cultural matrix that is America. You can't separate yourself from that. And I think over time, it became clear that those dreams of kind of creating our own autonomy is just not doable. And so what you're left with is then are the aesthetics, because that is doable. That you can do.
All that being said, those were all good times. Even the negative times, like they made cool stories now,
As much as I don't think pachucos were a good thing, you got to admit, it was cool.